Welcome back.
I gotta put my microphone on.
Oh yeah,
It's Two Beards in a Bible.
I'm John Swano, and this here guy is Dave Tenney, and we are just
Confused a little bit.
getting behind here. So yeah, so we were looking at 1 Timothy is where we left off last time, and we were surmising that we should pick up about verse 14.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think it's your turn to read.
I believe you.
You know why? Because I just listened to myself read.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, then how far do you think? You want me to just go to the end of the chapter?
Just go to the end of the chapter.
All right, so 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 14 says, "These things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. But if I am delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up in glory."
Okay, these things that he was writing to him was obviously talking about what we talked about in our last episode.
Right.
Was the qualifications of elders and deacons. Right. So he wrote those things for the reason that they would know how to conduct themselves.
Yeah.
Now, that brings me to a question. Can a church exist scripturally without elders and deacons?
Well, yes, especially in the beginning, especially at these times in the beginning of the church, there might have been certainly a situation where there might not have been anybody that met those qualifications at the time.
Yeah.
And that's, what do you do with that group of people if you have especially at this point in time, it's not like they could go across town and go to the next assembly.
Right.
And so when you put things in context and match them up, it stands to reason that these are things that if you don't already have this available to a group, then these things need to be striven for.
Yeah, and certainly if a group doesn't have elders and deacons, then that needs to be like one of their major primary goals is to get elders and deacons.
Absolutely.
I know the congregation that I belong to does not and hasn't for 25, almost 30 years.
I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah, 1996, I believe.
Huh.
So we're going on a long, long time without elders or deacons. And I'm hoping someday we can correct that, in the very near future. But
and it isn't something to be taken lightly.
No.
I have when I started at Medina, of course there were no elders because the previous eldership, one of them had passed away, and there was nobody else that desired the position and or was qualified for a period of time.
Yeah.
And that was and I will say, when you're thinking of how Paul is writing these things to Timothy and to to the churches, he's saying that you ought to that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself. These are the things that you need to be doing.
Yeah.
And in times when we didn't have an eldership, we conducted a meeting of the men of the congregation to make decisions and so on. And I think I've said it before. It never turned into a tumultuous thing. I never have experienced the things that I hear about where people get mean and hateful and nasty over decisions that need to be made. And maybe some disagreements that just ought not to be a thing amongst the brethren. I've never experienced that, but I can tell you, if I never have to sit through another men's meeting, I'll be a happy person. So, because there's just that, there's that, you can see that there's, people don't want to upset the other, or maybe, in some cases, I understand, like I said, they do, but in my experience, people didn't want to upset maybe the other people, and so everybody was walking on eggshells, and nobody was really willing to just make a decision. And that sort of cripples any organization, but also, especially the church that has such an important mission.
I think the major issue with not having, or the major, yeah, I would say the major issue or the thing that hurts a church by not having elders is there's no spiritual leadership. There's zero.
Right.
And if you're a man who wants to do that sort of thing, you don't have any authority to actually do any of that stuff. So it's really a situation where you can't have spiritual leadership because you have to have an elder. You have to be an elder to fill that role.
And so many times, just by default, it just sort of falls to the preacher, to be
To
that
take
one,
care of everything.
to take care of everything, to make the decisions, in some cases. While there may be, of course, other men that come together and make a decision, there's a lot that is put on the preacher in those situations. Many times, not every time, but that can be an issue.
Yeah, they make him the elder.
Right.
And that's a terrible situation too.
And I think that happens many times unwittingly. I don't think anybody in the Lord's church sets out to do that, because that would be an unscriptural organization, but it just sort of happens.
Yeah. So anyway, so the ideal is that a group would have elders and deacons. Now, one of the problems with that is a lot of congregations, they don't have any men that are qualified, and that's another issue. So why aren't there men that are qualified?
Exactly. It's something that Christians need to really take seriously. When they undertake this on this journey of being a Christian, you're obedient to the gospel of Christ, and that living faithfully for the rest of your life. You have to work towards the things that are pleasing in God's sight, and this is one of those things that is pleasing in His sight. So, you want to really strive to raise your children in the care and admonition of the Lord, that they might be faithful, that you might be found to be a person who possesses those qualities that are spoken of. Living your life, understanding that you're in a fishbowl, in sort of in one way, as a Christian. I mean, people notice. If you act as the scriptures tell you to, you're going to stand out amongst everybody at work and in the world, and they're going to notice a difference, and they're going to be watching to watch you stumble.
Yes,
and that's it's a rough spot to be.
It is,
because every human being is fallible.
Yeah,
and we all have our weaknesses in some area.
When you look at the qualifications for elders and deacons, in my mind, I would think, if you've got men taking the responsibilities on that they ought to be doing, in a congregation of 50 or 60 people, you ought to have 2 or 3 guys that are walking down that road easily.
Right.
In a congregation of 100, you ought to have at least 4 guys that are. I mean, if you've got men that are pursuing spiritual things.
And many times, you might have people that are qualified in every way, except they don't desire it.
Yeah, and that happens too.
And that's, that's an individual decision, and it's not something to be taken lightly, because it takes, it's different than you think it's going to be, and even amongst a close group of brethren, there's going to be things that come up, and they're difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to deal with things, and that's a big step, and you don't want someone to just kind of feel compelled to do it because they know that they should, but you want them to really desire that position.
Absolutely. So,
and that's exactly what the scriptures say.
Yeah. So it always amazes me that, Paul tells Timothy, go over to Ephesus and appoint some elders. It seems like, there were multiple guys that fit these things. So
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder maybe if we're too hard on ourselves, but
Well, certainly. Yeah. It was a sort of a long journey for me in coming to that realization because, and I talked with you about this at the time.
Oh, yeah.
That I didn't feel for a while. I just didn't feel like I was old enough.
yeah, yeah,
Like things. When you stop and think about it, and the desire, in regard to my own thinking, the desire was there, but I was wanting to make sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and that I fit the bill.
yes,
And that's a continual process.
yeah,
And through some the encouragement of you and and other brethren, in many other places that I talked to, came to the realization that if you have that desire and you fit these criteria, then
then you're qualified.
you're qualified.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
and that's we shouldn't be hard on ourselves.
Yeah,
God made the plan for His church pretty simple.
yeah, yep, absolutely. So let's talk about now that we wore that out for
Right.
10 minutes. So he says that you ought to know how you conduct yourselves in the house of God. He says, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The local church. Now, do you think he's talking about the local church or the broader church?
Yes. I for my first blush would be that it's the broader church.
I would think so too.
But it would certainly apply, in
Yeah.
any local area.
Yeah. Now, so I've heard some take this that it says the church is the pillar of truth and the ground. It says the pillar and ground of the truth, and they'll make this assumption that the church has all the authority for doing teaching. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard something like that?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what this is teaching.
Right.
It's not teaching that it's the exclusive right of the church to do. Maybe the members of the church, yes.
Right.
But it's not the exclusive right of the local church to do teaching.
Right. And that can get sticky when you get into that, because what you end up doing is you end up cutting the brethren off at the knees.
Yeah.
And you might have some brethren that are very good at teaching and having Bible studies and so on. And they have the ability to reach out and to share the gospel with others. Now the church would be and should be involved to the degree,
especially if you have elders, they should be involved in all of that stuff.
right? And they would be in on the conversation, and it would be a wise thing to talk to the elders and say, hey, I'm studying with this person and I'm thinking about these things. Do you have any advice? And I'm going to bring them. I'm going to try to get them to come to church, and let's make sure we introduce them to you and all that sort of thing. It's a collective effort, but the individual is powerful, and in some ways, sometimes a group will say that everything has to be done through the collective church, and that puts a lot on
a few people.
You're making the preacher and and the elders. They're going to have to go out and if you have 200 people, how are you going to keep up with all of that? It just doesn't make sense on a couple levels. But there is a place for understanding that the church is the chosen vessel of God for the teaching and the spreading of the gospel. But the church involves all those individuals.
Yeah.
And that's what the church is. It's the individuals. It's not the entity.
It's not the building.
It's not the corporation of
exactly. I think that's what gets lost in there.
Yeah.
And that's why
And I don't want to take away I don't want to take away the importance and the validity of those individuals, being, under if they're under an eldership, to include the other brethren in this process.
Yeah.
It can only make you stronger by including your brethren with you. You don't necessarily strike out there on your own and just do it all yourself. And
when I was under an eldership, and that I do a lot of personal work. Mm-hmm. When I was doing that work, whoever I was doing it with, I would just say, "Hey," I'd just meet with one of them, or usually it was just one of them. I'd say, "Hey, I've got 2 studies this week with this person and that person, mm-hmm. and just here's what's going on." I didn't go to ask them permission to do Bible studies with people,
right?
And and they never had expected that either,
Right.
But we just got to be careful. Sometimes we can get you can get so legalistic about some of these things that you can hamper the work of the church.
Yeah, and I guess there's a point at which you do need to be careful, because you can an individual. I'm just brainstorming here of what could happen.
Yeah,
thinking of eventualities. An individual that perhaps is charismatic and is able to get a bunch of people to listen, which that's a good thing, but it could eventually turn into a group that is revolving around that individual
person. Yeah,
and that's where you have to tread carefully, and you include the eldership and the oversight, and you have it's not we would do that in almost anything. We have accountability amongst each other. I've seen a couple people kind of go rogue.
I'm thinking of a biblical example. When Paul told, I think it's the Corinthians, he said, "Hey, some of you," he said, "I'm thankful I didn't baptize any of you guys, because some of you are saying I'm of Paul and I'm of Cephas and all." And it was that's what happened there. That very thing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Paul's fault, and it wasn't Peter's fault.
And it's perhaps one of the reasons that that he's telling them, so you ought to know how you ought to conduct yourselves.
Yeah.
Because there has to be some kind of an order to things.
Absolutely.
Years ago, when I owned a driving school, I had an employee that was really, he was a go-getter, and he would come in, and he would just take a stack of students. The way that the business worked is a bunch of students would come in, and you'd have to spread their driving out over time. He would come in and get a stack, and that's great. He wants to come and take a stack of students. Well, he took a huge stack, and he didn't have a life at home besides work, and he just went and drove all these people in an inordinate amount of time. He spent doing that work. And then comes to me with all these hours, and I'm like, "Look, the cash flow don't work that way. You got to talk to me about these things."
Yes.
And so he got out of control.
Yeah.
He was doing a good thing, but he got in over his head.
Well, I think too, as we're talking, this just kind of thinking about this. He writes these things so they know how to conduct themselves. What's he's talking about? That they should have elders and deacons.
Right.
That's the conduct that he's talking about.
Right.
That it's the organization of the church is what he's talking about.
He's speaking about the entirety of the brotherhood, the brethren, and they need to conduct themselves in such a way that includes the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of elders and deacons, and that puts in place some safeguards.
Yeah, and I think that's what the idea of elders, the real idea of elders, is just to kind of be. I mean, they're called shepherds.
Yeah,
and shepherds watch over the sheep.
Right,
and that's what their goal is. That's what they're trying to do. Right. Somebody's needs to be paying attention to how people's lives are going.
Yeah,
and how they're spiritual.
And back to that. if you were to strike off and start and start doing a whole bunch of things completely independently, don't tell anybody,
Right.
then how is the eldership going to help, watch out for some pitfalls that
Right.
might come
Exactly.
about? And so it has to be connected. You can't forsake the fact that you're part of a local congregation that has an eldership.
Yeah. Yeah. But, Christians it's really, I guess the whole point is it's Christians that are supposed to be out there
Right.
converting people.
Right.
That's the job of the Christian, to make more Christians.
Right.
It's not necessarily the job of the church.
Right.
Of the worship service. That's
Right.
because that's what people think of it.
Right. Yeah, because we're battling with the true definition of church and
Yes,
and what
yeah,
we think
yeah,
about.
yeah. But what people think of is they think of, the teaching takes place in the worship service. No, there is teaching that goes on there. There's also worship that goes on there as well.
Yeah.
But there's no evangelism taking place in the building. There's none.
Yeah, the teaching is an avenue of worship.
Yes,
that we engage in on the first day of the week because God said so.
Yeah.
But you're right. How many, you think about all the people that, I can tell you, for instance, myself, I wasn't evangelized, and I didn't choose to be faithful and obey the gospel because of a church service that I sat in.
It was probably because of your father-in-law.
Well, that and other individuals that took it upon themselves to teach.
Yes.
And to have one-on-one conversations and point me in the right direction.
For me, it was one of my uncles.
Yeah.
Right. That's how.
Right.
That's how I got started. It was somebody, but I think is an important thing to understand that evangelism does not take place in a church building ever.
Right. Well, I'd say that it can,
but it almost never does.
And I think it did more in history. The Word of God is powerful, and if the Word of God is being preached, then evangelism can take place. I mean, it can.
But the only way you're going to get somebody new there is the chances of somebody just wandering in off the street.
Right.
I'm not saying it has happened.
Yeah.
Right. I've witnessed it. I've had Bible studies with people that just walked in.
Right.
That's super rare though.
Yeah.
The way most of the time somebody comes there is somebody brought them.
Right.
So and that's the evangelism. When you talk to your neighbor and you get them to come to a service, that's evangelism.
To add to what I think we're trying to get at is that if you think that you can evangelize your neighbor by inviting them to the church service once a week, you're mistaken. It takes more than that.
It takes more than that.
Yeah.
Right.
Unless they're a very astute person and can pick up on those things, but that's the rarity. It takes a long time normally for people to wrap their brain around these ideas because most people have spent a lot of time in their lives being taught something completely different.
Yes. Yeah. So I've got a guy that I've been studying with for 2 years. Okay. Mm-hmm. He's just started to regularly attend church services. Mm-hmm. It takes time to convince somebody, that this is what you need to do.
Yeah. It's so...
you're not going to get it just attending a worship service one time, really.
Right. And this is kind of, again, where the pillar in the ground of truth, the church, comes into play, because there are so many religious groups out there that have been teaching and showing people for so many years that all you have to do is love Jesus. And come when you can.
Yeah.
But the church, should noticeably assemble, on the first day of the week.
Absolutely.
They should be a family that is together often. It should be noticeable among the people that you're around that you spend a lot of time with other Christians.
Yeah.
And those other people should be invited to join in, and get to know that group of people. And over time and through some study, the Word of God will do its job.
Absolutely.
It's like you said, sometimes we get so wrapped up in And think about this. It's easy. If all we had to do was show up on Sunday and perhaps Wednesday or Thursday, and that's all we had to do, and people would just magically be converted. Well, that would be that would be too easy. And if that were the case, we would have full buildings.
Right.
But it doesn't happen that way because there's a whole lot of lies out there being taught that show that there's some fun way that you can be pleasing to the Lord by doing the things that you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have you seen a congregation close its doors in the last 20 years? Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen several of them.
Yeah.
And and if you visit some of these congregations, you can tell they're dying.
Right.
And part of the problem is they're not making more Christians.
Right.
You know, they're not converting people. And if we don't do that, you know, your local congregation is going to go away if you don't do that.
And it's an uphill battle, too.
It is.
Because, you know, you come into churches, assemblies go through cycles, it seems, where you have a time where, you know, you have maybe some younger people come into the group, you have some children there, that kind of rejuvenates things for a little while.
Yep.
And you're kind of like on an upswing because, you know, the young people perhaps are more socially active and out there and, you know, bringing friends and so on, and that's kind of an upswing. But then people get older and time goes on, and then it goes through a downturn, and that's the time where you really have to be vigilant.
Yeah.
And realize that our job is to do more than just show up once a week.
Yes.
You know, this should be an everyday thing. This is your life. You know, literally.
It's and if you don't, you know, if we don't do that, like I said, you know, the congregation you're part of is going to go away eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've seen it over and over.
Well, I mean, there's one in particular that you and I both know and were a part of it to some degree over the years that was huge.
500 and some members.
Yeah, and you know, 30 years ago, it would have been unfathomable to think that group would ever go away.
Yes.
But
they closed their doors
things changed.
a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was, just, it's unbelievable that could have happened.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, I don't know what they needed. I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. I mean, but here's what I can tell you. Something probably needed done and something didn't get done.
Well, yeah, and it was, there's a myriad of, you know, you could look back and think, and there's a lot of factors that came into play there. But nonetheless, you know, it happens when we get too comfortable and just going through, and we're creatures of habit. I mean, you know, you probably do stuff like this. I wake up every morning and, you know, it's the coffee, it's the cereal, it's the same sort of, kind of do the same things every morning. You know, we get into those habits and that's comfortable, but that can be detrimental to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's hard to, this evangelism thing is hard to do.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be you out preaching on the street corner.
Right.
That's not what I mean. It's just trying to meet new people and get conversations started with
That's
them.
it.
That's all it is.
Real conversations. You know, I think sometimes, I know I've overthought it in the past, you know, that I have to have some kind of a written study that I need to sit down and go, you know, we can get locked into going through the motions of, you know, this particular way of study or so on. And sometimes most of the time, it's going to start out with someone who asks you a question, and then you start with that. You know, just like the Ethiopian eunuch. You know, he was studying in a certain place, and Philip took him from where he was, and taught him about Christ. You know, so wherever those questions come at you, come out of left field sometimes. Yeah. But bring that back around to Christ. Plant a seed. Yeah. And then let that do its job.
And before you can do that, you have to have a certain amount of Bible knowledge.
Yeah.
And the one thing, you cannot get Bible knowledge without personal study,
Right.
it's not possible.
Right.
If you think you're just going to attend Bible class and you think that's how you're going to get your Bible knowledge, it's not nearly intense enough.
Right.
If you were to show up to whatever, you were in high school and you show up to the science class and the science teacher hadn't read the book, right? He wouldn't be able to teach the class.
Right.
And the same way, if you haven't read the Bible through, well, that's a place to start.
You're a musical person, and
Especially if I've had too much chili.
do you know? You probably, when a song comes on the radio from 30 years ago that you remember,
Yeah.
the words come right to you.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because you spend a lot of time
Singing
it.
Yep.
You know, so same thing with the word.
It's the same thing. The more you get your nose in it,
Yeah.
the more that word's implanted in you, more that you can use it. So I know we're running a little over today, but let's look at this last couple of verses. He says, God was manifested in the flesh. So manifested means
Brought forward.
brought forward or made known.
Made known, yeah.
So God was made known in the flesh. He was justified in the spirit. So how was he justified in the spirit? I think one way would be that when Jesus was baptized, it says the Spirit of God descended on him like a dove. I would say that would show his approval.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, and when you think of, the Spirit, and a lot of what the Holy Spirit does is it brings forth, it brought forth the Word,
Absolutely.
as the helper to those,
Yep.
to the apostles, as that was promised, and it was there in the beginning with God, and as we know that the Word, became flesh and dwelled among us. So I think there's a connection there between being justified in the Spirit and being living out the Word
Absolutely.
as it was written in times of old, and as Christ spoke, he didn't contradict any of that.
He was seen by angels, right? He preached among the Gentiles, or he was actually, I would say that he was preached among the Gentiles. And he was, right? Even during the time of Jesus, he healed a Gentile woman. So, believed on in the world, right? And he has been, and he continues to be today. And he was received up in glory. Of course, he's sitting right now at the right hand of God. So I guess that'll wrap up chapter 4.
Yeah.
Can you believe we spent this whole episode on just a few verses?
Right. Well, yeah, I believe it. And in verse 16, it says, "And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness." So, these things, this truth,
It's truth.
incontrovertible.
Yeah. There's no reason to argue about it.
Yep.
All right, John, you ready?
We'll see ya.